Well, guys, it's finally that time of the year again. Conference championships have arrived. But more importantly, the playoff picture for this upcoming playoff season is looking more complex than ever. We have so many contenders that could potentially be getting in as compared to years past. You have those 5 or 6 teams and everyone else doesn't matter. This year, though, there's 8 teams right now that have a legitimate shot at getting in the playoffs. And a lot of crazy things can happen because there's a lot of things that can happen in these conference championship games that could shape the way some of these outside teams can get in, Aiden. But one of the things that we really want to discuss in this video is not exactly what is going to happen if this team loses to this team, but more so of the fact that we feel like the playoff committee doesn't always get the playoff picture right. We feel like there are some teams that are always getting in that aren't one of the best 4 teams in football. And we feel like the committee's made a bunch of blunders, in previous seasons and picking the 4 best 4 teams or what they call the best 4 teams. What is your overall opinion of this playoff committee and what would you like to see them do different in this upcoming season or this upcoming playoffs?
The biggest thing with the committee is that they're just inconsistent with how they make their decisions. I think that's the problem a lot of people have with them is that you say it's the best 4 teams, like you're saying, but you give Cincinnati in, you put TCU in, and it's blowouts, But every single year in the 14 playoffs, it's pretty much only been 2 teams that are competitive anyway, and they will find their way through and end up playing each other. And that was my thing in seasons prior whenever it was announced that we're going to a 12-team playoff, is that there's only 2 competitive teams every single year. And it's only like 4 different teams: Ohio State or Michigan, it was Clemson, and then it was Alabama and Georgia. But with NIL, it's completely opened up. And this year specifically, you're seeing a lot of coaches in their 3rd and 4th year that have had time to develop, like, Norvell at Florida State. His guys are finally gone through his system and he's having success there. But it's more competitive than ever. And people are going to be very upset if they're not let in because, like you said, there's many contenders. So it is going to be critical for the committee to make the correct decision. Is it going to be the best 4 teams, or is it going to be the 3rd and 4th team with the best resumes? You know what I'm saying? Oregon, Ohio State, and Texas, they are all very good football teams. If the committee makes an inconsistent decision, those fan bases are going to riot, you know? Oregon and Bo Nix and Dan Lanning specifically has taken Bo Nix on a Heisman run. He's not taking him out of these games, 6 touchdowns and a half. Oregon's making their run. Sarkisian at Texas is making his run. And then, of course, you got Ohio State there. How these conference championship games play out is going to be a big sign, specifically with Oregon, them being almost double-digit favorites against Washington, who beat them in the regular season. That's very telling for the trajectory of this Oregon team. And the committee has shown teams that do, skyrocket at the end of the season are more likely to get in, than like an Ohio State who just lost to Michigan and is not going to play in the conference championship.
Yeah, Aiden, I 100% agree with you on what you just said. One of my questions, I have another question for you, and I'm curious to get your take on this. If Georgia plays Alabama and Georgia loses, is it pretty safe to say that Georgia's one of the best 4 teams in college football? And if they were to lose, based on what we're saying, do you think Georgia should still get in even if they lost to Alabama?
Um, yes. Now, if they go out and lose by, 3 touchdowns, it's going to be a lot harder for the committee to do that because that loss is so recent, like I was just saying with Ohio State versus Michigan. But you can't look at this Georgia team and not think that they're one of the best teams in the country, at least top 3 at the very least. And, people like Colin Coward and Joel Klatt, I was listening to their show, and I hate to diss them, but I'm kind of gonna. They were saying, who has Georgia played? Who has Georgia played? Dude, they kind of rolled through number 9 Missouri, who's been on fire all season. So I don't really understand, like, who have they played? They've looked dominant in every single game. Carson Beck is in the Heisman race. Brock Bowers was in the Heisman race. How many teams had 2 players in the Heisman race? You know, this defense has been plug and play. They got 2 freshman linebackers playing. C.J. Allen and I don't know the other guys rotating in with Smile Munden, but they are still dominating with these young guys playing, and they got completely new guys for the most part in these back-to-back championship games, and it's the same product. They just went undefeated in the SEC. I don't care how what their history is. If you go undefeated in the SEC, that shows you're a very, very good, if not elite football team. So, of course, if they lose to Alabama, they're still going to get in. If the committee stays true to putting the best four teams in. Now, would that open up the window for Alabama? It would have to, right? I mean, their loss was so early to Texas, and Texas is a contender, and Alabama has changed so much throughout the course of the year. And that's where it gets difficult. Do you have two SEC teams in this year with how competitive it is? I don't know, Drew. That's a question I would ask you. But that's why we have the committee. Those are the decisions they need to be making. But what are your thoughts on that? Like, if Alabama beats Georgia, do two SEC teams make it?
I think a lot of it's going to depend on what happens elsewhere. I think if Georgia, we talked about, I personally, of course, think Georgia should get in. Even if they lose to Alabama, I do think they're one of the best four teams in college football. But in this case, going off what the committee typically does in their pattern, I feel like Georgia would need Florida State to lose, and I think they would need Texas to lose as well. And then I think what would happen is Alabama would obviously jump Georgia. Georgia would probably fall to fourth. Alabama would go to 3 or 2. And I feel like that's how that would play out right then and there. Now, another thing too is, Georgia's not the only team in college football who we can look at and be like, yes, that's guaranteed. They're guaranteed a top 4 team in the country. Michigan's the same way. And how you look at the other teams, I don't know how, like, in my opinion, I think Oregon, one of the best 4 teams in college football right now. There is no other team. Honestly, there really is no other team at all that I can look at and point at and say they've been playing more dominant and better football than Oregon week in and week out. Oregon had a little bit of a slow start to the season. Texas Tech was a little rocky, and then the Washington loss. Ever since then, though, and I've been saying this, Oregon has looked like the best football team in the country. Even if they were to somehow lose against Washington, I still think they're one of the best 4 teams in the country. But this is kind of what we're getting at here. And what we're not really trying to persuade you to think one way or another, but it's we would like to see change in the college football committee. We want to see the best football teams in so we can avoid these blowouts. That's basically the whole point of what we're trying to get out here, Aiden.
Yeah, and you don't want to see teams, especially when it's so competitive, get left out that should be in, because like I said at the beginning of the video, the committee is so inconsistent with how they make their decisions. If you're going to do it based off resume, just say that. But as far as Oregon goes, Texas Tech is a good team. Their star quarterback been injured like pretty much his whole tenure there. He transfers out, and early in the season, Texas Tech is a tough team to play. They run a lot of quads formations, a lot of weird stuff on offense. Very, very fast tempo with that stuff too. But anyways, Oregon's continuously gotten better, and that Oregon and Washington game came down to one possession, and Michael Penix looks like he's fell in love with the deep ball, and kind of that he relies on his, receivers too much on those 50-50 balls. That's just from what I've seen the last couple of days. He's, been a gambler. He's always been a gunslinger, but he's been gambling a little too much the last couple of games. I think that's a big reason why Oregon is favored by so much. But one team we're not talking about, though, Drew, is Ohio State. One spot over Texas. Their defense has improved very much with Jim Knowles being there, especially from his first year to his second year. How their defense played in the playoff games made him, go back to the drawing board, get a lot more basic, and really just get his guys very good at the fundamentals and just letting them play, and you can tell the difference. With that being said, though, Kyle McCord, I've been saying it all year. Is he a good college quarterback? Yes, but I believe in this era of college football and football in general, you need an elite quarterback, when you're talking about going for a national championship, right? And I just do not think that Kyle McCord is that guy. He is a good quarterback. I do not think he's elite. Ohio State's been able to lean on their run game, play action off of that. I do not think against a Georgia defense, we saw it against a Michigan defense, it's not going to work, When I look at Texas, I like what Sarkisian's done there. He's had some rocky games, but sitting there with one loss, ranked at 7, and they get the opportunity to play in the Big 12 championship, Drew. So when you look at Ohio State and Texas, do you think that Texas has an opportunity to jump Ohio State and then possibly, the loser of the Pac-12 and maybe sneak in depending on what they do with Florida State? Does Texas have an opportunity with this Big 12 championship to jump Ohio State and these other teams?
Yeah, and I think Texas would jump Ohio State just simply because Ohio State didn't make the conference championship game. Now, if you were to look at it from the perspective we were talking about and you're trying to determine who the better team is between those two, you can make arguments for that all you want. I wouldn't be opposed to someone telling me that Ohio State's better than Texas because maybe they are a better team than Texas. But what the committee is going to do, obviously, is Texas is going to jump Ohio State. But I don't think Texas can automatically get in to the playoffs with a win in their Big 12 title game. They do need some help. I do think Florida State would need to lose, obviously. I think Georgia would obviously need to beat Alabama. And obviously, Texas has to win against Oklahoma State. And I feel like they probably should win that and cover the spread. I think the spread of that game is 14.5 points. Texas is going to have to cover that spread too to really make a point as well to make it hard for the committee to keep him out. But Aiden, one of the biggest question marks right now is Florida State. Only 2.5 point favorites to Louisville. This is a Florida State team that is without Jordan Travis, their starting quarterback. Did have an impressive win on the road at Florida last week. We know Florida's not a great team, but a lot of people, including myself, were taking Florida to potentially upset Florida State, but they went in the swamp and got it done. Nonetheless, this is a Florida State team that literally looks like they're hanging by a thread here.
Yeah, and they survived a couple of games that they probably should have lost. That Miami game, they got out of that game in overtime against Clemson, and then losing their star quarterback on top of that is tough. It is tough to make an argument that they are a top 4 team. And I was saying that when they had Jordan Travis. Without him, it is even harder to make, an argument for them being a top 4 team. And I think this is the biggest thing. If they go out and beat Louisville, and the spread's 2.5, like you said, if they win by 7 or less, the committee could keep them in. Going off just how they've made decisions in past, they always give a team like, okay, undefeated with the conference championship, here you go. Even though there's 2 other teams, that maybe had 1 loss that are better, that played the number 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 ranked team in the country, like a lot of these teams have. So I just don't believe that Florida State has enough firepower to deal with these other elite teams, especially when I'm looking at, Texas and Ohio State. And, I know I said that thing about elite quarterbacks with Ohio State, and Texas doesn't have, a very elite quarterback either. But that pretty much sums up my whole point. At the end of the day, Georgia's going to win it all. That's how I'm going to wrap up this video. Kirby Smart and Georgia are about to three-peat, and it's going to be the first time since like pre-World War II that it happens, and it's putting the rest of college football on notice because Kirby Smart is setting a precedent that we maybe have never seen before in college football, depending on how he, finishes this season and goes about the next couple seasons.
Well, that's going to do it for this video, guys. As always, if you enjoyed it, please leave a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And let us know down below in the comment section. This is open discussion for anything you want to talk about playoff related. What you think the playoff committee should do, who the best 4 teams are in college football. And you can just list off random scenarios or ask us questions. If this team beats this team, what do we think is going to happen? Anything you can think of, leave that down below in the comment section and we'll answer it. But we'll see you guys in the next one.